All right, welcome back to the channel. On this video, we're going to be talking more Trench Crusade. Actually, I had to re-record this because I kept saying the word conquest because normally that's a little bit more of what I do. I don't have a catchy little fun way to put this together. The point of this video is something I said I wanted to do next. I want to do some reviews of other stuff and talk more about it, but something that as so for anyone who's newer to watching any of our stuff, hopefully you're enjoying it. Hopefully you subscribe so you can kind of keep up with the things that we're doing. But just so everyone's aware, by trade, I'm a mathematician. I teach math for a living. I teach statistics, probability, all those sorts of things, as well as the calc sequence and all of that. So one thing I noticed while watching players that I've seen or heard talk about or those sort of spots are people talking about the numbers related to Trench Crusade. Now, my thought of this particular video is I am going to, of course, share a bit of how to make some of these calculations and all like that. But the goal of this is not to say, all right, there's the action I'm going to do. Let me go sit down with a piece of paper and figure it out. You shouldn't really be doing that. That's not fun or in the spirit of it. But I do think it's useful for people to have at least a bit of knowledge of what is it you're looking at, what do these probabilities, odds are a little bit different. I will say for anyone who knows this better, I'm going to try to be more accurate by saying probability rather than odds because they're not the same thing. But for any layman sort of concept, you can think of probability and odds as a thing. Odds essentially give you the yes or no, where probability is the chance of yes instead. So I'll try to be careful with the terminology. Also, if someone else is very, very good at math, I'm not going to probably be telling you anything that you don't necessarily already know. Like I said, my goal of this isn't to go through and teach you how to calculate all the different probabilities. I will discuss how they're found and how to think about them. But the idea is much more of when you're thinking about your decisions, how much do you have to push certain things? What is a good idea to maybe aim for? What is not? Say as an example, one of the things I've watched a lot of people do is they were just storing up their blood markers, waiting to try and get that bloodbath. Okay, that's all well and good, but you need 6 of them. If you're only putting down 1 per shot, you're looking at a minimum of 6 things, assuming you don't take it out ahead of time or do anything else to it. Well, that 6 might be almost your army, or at least over half of it, and that's assuming everything works and goes well and all of that. And after 6 other shots, there's a reasonable chance, depending on what it is, unless maybe it has like a mechanized armor, or even like an armor 2, and we'll take a look at that. There's a decent chance you might just get lucky on the die roll anyway. So I thought with this I would be able to discuss a bit of those sort of things. If you enjoy this, there's going to be more Trench Crusade stuff coming. We now have at least 1 board that we like to look of, so I do want to start recording some games and putting those out. We have 10 plus people in our local area that are playing, so I have plenty of people to get some games in with. So I'm hoping maybe another week or so to actually start doing that. It'll be similar to other battle reports if you're watching any of ours, camera above, and I'll try to have a different camera on a gimbal as well, as best we can. All right, so that's that. Let's actually get into it then. All right, so like I said, this is Math in the Trenches. I think that's probably what I titled the video, at least what I thought to title it. I make the titles and little and image and all that stuff afterwards, so we'll see what comes up. So let's get into this a little bit. Part of this I want to discuss is problems that people have, and the reasons why people look at things in odd ways or some incorrectness. Now, one of the ones I want to mention, and this isn't the only one, and some of them I'll name, some not. One of them I want to mention that especially happens with miniatures players, at least as far as I've seen, and it happens to me sometimes, I try to avoid it, is what we call gambler's fallacy. So gambler's fallacy is the belief that what happened before is going to change what happens next when things are the same likeliness to occur. Now, we're not talking about taking a crate full of, or like a bowl probably makes more sense, a bowl full of marbles and pulling one out and holding it, or a deck of cards, pull out an ace, and now you want to go retrieve another ace while you're holding one in your hand. Obviously, that affects it. But we're talking about one of the most common ones, and the reason why they call it gambler's fallacy is things like roulette wheels. So if you ever go to a casino and you stand near a roulette table, what you'll hear after some amount of time is usually someone saying, oh, it hit black the last 3 times, so it's going to have to hit black again. Oh, it hit black the last 3 times, it's going to be red now because it's overdue. This idea that The probabilities, chances, the odds that they come due. This has happened a bunch, so either it should occur again or it should not occur again. And honestly, we put our bias to that of essentially which one we want. In other words, if you're hoping, I want to put it on, I haven't been to a casino in like 10 plus years. I'm going to say red 5. I don't know if that's true. Maybe red is black. I don't know. But red 5. Well, if I saw a bunch of red come up before, I'm either going to tell myself another red is owed, so I'll put it down, or I wait a little bit, and then no, now red is supposed to come up and all. So I watch it a lot of times as I put there this idea of, my dice have been really cold, so I'm due for something hot, or I have had really good rolls. They're either going to continue or they're going to fall apart, those sort of things. That's not to mean that you don't have times when you roll well and roll poorly. I watched a few games today where in the first game, the player I watched on 3 of his first 4 injury rolls were critical, two sixes. In the next game, I don't think he got any, but that just so happens. So yes, it is possible in your game that your dice go well. It is possible in your game that your dice go poorly. I do hazard a guess, and something to keep in mind. We tend to not. Okay, human memory is very bad. If you try to recall something from, let's say, a while back, I don't have a particular time frame. We can pull up the research if you want. But if you pull back a more of what you call long-term memory, you don't actually remember it correctly. Research has shown that we actually change that memory a bit. And it's usually changed in a advantageous way for us or a way that is less harmful to us. So like I have tattoos. Do I remember how bad they hurt? No, not really. Things from my childhood, remember the back? Yeah, but where we are currently changes and alters our thoughts on those sort of things. It's not the same sort of thing. We tend, and we're probably all guilty of this, we tend to remember the more dramatic parts to it. Think about just, maybe not so much this game because you have small amounts of dice, but think about any games, if you ever played 40K or something like that, where you're rolling, say, 15 dice or 20 dice at a time. What do you tend to notice first? Depending on your current position, you're either noticing the 6s, say the good result, or the 1s, say the bad results, or if it's a conquest, it might be the dice in reverse. But we tend to remember those more dramatic things. If you, let's say in a full game, I don't know, let's say you have 50 dice rolls. You very well could have more, but let's just make a nice round number, 50 dice rolls. You probably have a few of those that are the ones that you remember, but you probably remember them that time that you rolled 3 ones. I can call you back to multiple games. Remember when I was playing Warhammer 30K, and my guy had like 4 attacks on the charge. He hits on 2s. I rolled 4 ones. Kind of thing, We all remember that sort of stuff. We don't remember the other 47 or 45 out of those 50 times when they were perfectly average. Nothing too great, nothing too bad. They were just normal dice. So one thing to be aware of is our both misremembering as well as wanting or thinking we're owed. I might have said this story before, but I'm going to say this very briefly because anytime probability or dice rolls and all come up, people will make these sort of jokes. I was at the store I went to, Maplewood Hobby. There's an upstairs area. This is years back. Went to the upstairs area, and some guys were playing a game. They were playing a game of 40K, probably. Again, my memory's not too great. I'm assuming that's what it was. It probably was. And the one guy was just talking about his dice. Like he had rolled a die, and he's like, there goes one of the 6s it has. This was just some casual conversation. What ended up coming out was that when he said it's one of the 6s it has, wasn't more of a thought in passing. And almost in his mind, your dice have like a predetermined amount of rolls in them. So when you roll a 6, you've now removed a 6 from the potential future. And through a very long conversation, it kind of turned out that's what this guy actually believed. And I had to walk away because I personally just couldn't bear it anymore. So be careful with what you think should happen versus what will. Another one, confirmation bias. We kind of talked a little bit about this. That idea that we remember that information, incorrectly. I probably actually should have flipped over to this. I forgot which I had next. But yeah, oh, my dice were bad all day. That's why I lost. This happened to me. Or sometimes the more common one. My dice were not too great, but yours were really, really good, and that's what ends up happening. That's why I lost. That's why I didn't go my direction. One, it reduces the pure random nature of it. Again, you can have good and bad dice rolls. It will happen. We've all had games where it can go very well or very poorly, but on the average game, it doesn't. You remember the more drastic things, but most of them were usually not drastic at all. The other big thing is that as it mitigates player skill, I know at least depending on the game or like how casual it is or things like that, whether or not after the game I want to do that like breakdown of how everything went. Sometimes I just had a fun game, I'm fine with it. Where I don't care about that conversation of, oh well, here's how you could have done better, or if we change these sort of things. If I'm just playing for fun, I don't care how I could have done better. I'm playing for fun. It's meaningless to me. If I'm playing to do it in that more competitive form, not necessarily competitive level, but more competitive form, sure. But a lot of times, if you start off the thought of, oh man, yep, my dice just went real bad, or oh your dice were so great, you're kind of removing any skill in the game. Now, Trench Crusade, as well as a variety of other games, have random chance, and this one can potentially, in my mind, to certain levels, swing a little bit more than some others, and that's honestly just because this is a 2D, in essence, a 2d6 system, which means you're just as likely to get the result of doing nothing, the double one, as you are getting the result of you take out anything that you want, the double six, and everything in between. So, yes, you will have times. I had it before. I went against a guy in mech armor, and boom, I rolled a 12. It was like the first shot against, or second shot against the guy. All right, well, yeah, I lucked out there. Most of the time, 1 in 36 chance. Usually, it doesn't happen whatsoever. It did that time. Like the 2% that it could occur, or a little over 2%, like 2.5 or so, round up to 3, let's say. But that's not what normally happens. And putting yourself into positions to give yourself the chances for those spikes is part of your skill. So as a player, what at least I try to avoid now is that thing of afterwards in the game, blaming my dice or blaming my opponent's dice when the game is over if we're talking through the game. If we'll know if it's a dice thing if we've both commented on how it is across that game. I have played games where we're both like, or I play like, oh, I'm sorry, my dice are so good, and we see how bad your dice are, kind of things, like going back and forth. But most games, they're perfectly fine. Most games, they're reasonably average. So, don't attribute, your losses just to the probabilities, just to the dice. Can it happen? Sure. But there's probably some other stuff along the way. You probably, if you put your guy in a spot where your opponent got a nice lucky long shot on him, could you have not have put the guy in the spot? Did you have to put him there? Those sort of thoughts. So if you're going to actually try to analyze it, you have to analyze it from a little bit more of a perspective of fairness. Don't just attribute it to the dice. Another big problem that people have when it comes to probability or considering these sort of things is the pure lack of intuition. The probability is the mathematical laws of chance. That's what probability actually is. It's not your perception. It's not your belief. It's not what you think may occur. There's a few very classic examples. One of them is the birthday problem. I'll discuss it briefly. So the birthday problem is a very simple idea. I'm going to put people into a room, and I want to figure out how many people do I have to put in this room until 2 people share the same birthday. 50-50 chance that they'll share that same birthday. Now, that's not you and someone else sharing the same birthday. Just 2 random people in the room have the same birthday. 50-50 chance is what I'm looking for. And I'll ask this to my students, and you get answers like, 180, 182, about half of the year. That we cover about half of the days. You hear 365, or sometimes, even if I cover every day, there's a certain amount of likeliness, and they go from there. Not everyone has a good feel for what the number should be. Well, turns out if you do the calculations, 24 people. If you have a room of 24 people, it is 50-50 chance that 2 of them have the same birthday. Out of that 365 days. If you get the room to low 40s, it's about 42 or so people. It's well into the 90s. So it's almost a guarantee that 2 people have it. You don't have to get anywhere near the amount of the year. It has to do with the fact that to do that calculation, what you're actually going to calculate is that no one shares it. And by the time you try to get to 24 of no one sharing it, you're about 50-50. So things like that, or the very classic Monty Hall problem, those sort of ideas show us that the way you want to think about it, if you're not using the actual rules, is an incorrect way to think about it. So just be careful with that and these sort of things. You want to avoid the, yeah, it's about like this. Is it actually like that? So let's get into a little bit of this. So in here, we just have a sum of 2 die chart. So we're just assuming no plus or minus to this, or enough plus and minuses that it's all balanced out. And the normal to hitting on that 7, as we see, is 58%. So in general, when you are, say, trying to dash and you just got your flat 2 dice and all, about 58% of the time, round it, say 60% of the time. So 6 out of 10 times it's going to work. Yeah, when you do this, I know at least I've rolled it many times on a 3 and still miss. It still happens, especially with my lines of Jabir. But that means for your risky actions, if you are really worried about being able to go off, so say you have a sniper priest and you want to get him those extra dice, you're looking at about a 40% chance that your model doesn't do anything that turn then. So I have watched some players say, I'm going to take this risky action because I want those extra dice. Well, you're already on like a lot of plus dice and you're still on plus dice overall. Do you want to take a 40% chance that you don't even get attempt the shot? Are you actually changing it that much? And we'll take a look at a moment and discuss how much you honestly changing it by. And we're going to see, realistically, not too much. So in that sort of example, maybe you do it because they're at long, actually long range won't matter if you put the scope on them, but they have cover, or maybe they have something that adds the extra. I know at least in Sultanate, we have some ways to make cover count as a -2 instead, or some other minuses, whatever it may be. Okay, maybe then I do it. But if you're already at like a +1 die, you're going to give yourself 40% chance for the gains, and we'll show those in a moment. All right. So depending on the target number, depends on the probability. So we put that here through the various target numbers and their general probabilities. The big thing, as you'll notice in the chart, is that the most results are 7. There's 6 of them. Then it goes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 all the way down. And you'll notice that, of course it does get progressively lower, but there is larger jumps, or at least maybe more important jumps. Looking at, the 9 to 10 or even towards an 11, those are where you're getting some of these very, very big jumps. That's where you're going from, 8 and 7 are both around a half. 42 or 58 is about a 50-50 for all intents and purposes when you're doing it. Again, no, it's not exactly that. But if you're just playing on a game and trying to figure out about how's this going to go, yeah, 7's better than 8, but hey, they're both reasonably close. Getting a bunch of 7s or getting a bunch of 8s or trying for one of those shouldn't feel too off. But now when you start getting to that 9 or 10 and all of that, now it starts to hurt a little bit. So now if we're, say, looking at that 9, we're looking at base injury rolls. So that means about 30% of the time, about 3 out of every 10 times that you roll those dice, you're going to take a model out, assuming they have no armor. And assuming you have no plus, just on those pure flat dice. So I know, at least through my plays, as well as like the 3 plays I watched today, because I didn't actually play today. I'm still working on my models, they're not all on their bases. But just sitting there today, I noticed there was a lot of, you roll up, no, you just knocked them down. You didn't quite get to that result. Because actually there's only about a 30% chance. And if they have some armor, which the ones I was seeing today were at least armor 1, a lot of times armor 2, now you're going to like 17 or maybe even 8%. As soon as you don't have a plus and they're putting you at like -2 armor, 1 out of every 10. So you're really not going to get through, which means you don't want to be targeting just off of the 2. Going with just that isn't going to be enough to get you anywhere. And that kind of shows the need to maybe spend some of that blood early, or for the other spots you want to put onto it. Also notice that does mean, as we'll see later, sometimes it's worth spending it to give the negatives rather than giving yourself some of those pluses. And we'll take a look at some of those results. But this is at least a good spot to start because this is the most common thing just on flat 2 dice. So depending on what you're trying to do, like I said, 7 and 9 are probably the biggest ones to look at, but obviously it can vary from there. All right, so that's a little bit about the base numbers. The base numbers people don't usually have a problem with. You want to do the base, there's 36 total outcomes. The way you calculate this, how many are that number or more? The biggest thing is if you can remember that there is 6 sevens, everyone else scales by 1 off in each direction. So there are 5 eights, 4 nines, and so on. You can actually quickly calculate it if you want. Like I said, if you remember that 7's about 60, 8 say is about 40, or if you, like I said, if you're just doing fast, about half the time you should expect it, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little under half, gives you at least a ballpark. So that way you can determine, like I said, I find when you're taking, say, those risky actions, especially dashing, of course, is a big thing. And sometimes you need to dash first so that we can charge afterwards. All right, well, if you're dashing, you're going to miss it about 40% of the time. So are you willing to do that? Are you well positioned? If you're moving in such a way that you're going to be out of cover unless you also get the dash, are you willing to be okay with the fact that 40% of the time you will be stuck there? If that's really going to be very advantageous to you, or maybe even, oh, I could sit here with some cover, or if I go this way and I get my dash, I'll be hidden. Okay, is the 40% chance that that doesn't work very tough for you to overcome? Are you facing down a machine gun on the other side? Yeah, being hidden be nice, but I personally, depending on how much of a betting person you are, I'd rather take the guaranteed cover than the 40% that I'm just standing out in the open. Although on that, hey, there's only about 30% chance on each of those things that they're taking you down. So that gives you a little bit of the base idea to help you figure out what to do when. Let's take a look at the advantage. So when you're at positive dice, now I'm not going to go through the full list of, if you're at like positive 3, 4, 5, 6 and stuff like that, because you don't need to go that far at all. A few things. One, this is easier to calculate than failure is. Failure is much more difficult calculation. I'm going to show the answers to some of this. I will discuss a little bit how it's calculated. We're going to discuss why you don't have to worry after a certain point. So if there are 3 dice and you're at advantage, so let's say you're at +1 die, the net result of what you got is +1 die. So 3 dice, or at least 2 of them are 7 or more, is about 93%. So you go from about 58% to about 93. So you're gaining, in that case, a little bit of about 35%. So you're gaining, an extra, pretty much 1/3 maybe is a nice way to kind of round it off. But 93% is exceedingly likely. Now, for this calculation, just to make sure people kind of understand how you come up with this. And this is why I'll show you the one for 4 as well. We'll talk about it, but you don't really have to go beyond that because it doesn't give you any good. When you do this, it's easier sometimes. So you have 3 dice, any 2 of them being 7 or more, I've hit. Okay, let's think of what that means. Could mean the first 2, could mean the last 2, or it could be the first and third. And it could be any one of those, or it could be all of those, or any 2 of those. You only need 1 set. But if you have one of those sets, or 2 of those sets, or all 3 of those sets, you've met the condition. You've hit. Now, we're not looking at like crits. We could discuss, obviously, throwing in more dice ups your potential of critting. But let's assume you're not just hunting for that for the moment. All right. So if we're adding that extra bit in, but that means I'd have to calculate any 1 pair working, or 2 pairs working, or all 3 working. That's a lot of calculations. If you knew there was a 70% chance of a yes, then you know there's a 30% chance of no. So oftentimes in probability, it's easier to calculate the fact of failure. So what would it mean to fail in this case? That would mean those 3 dice, no combination makes a 7 or more. Okay, that, if I know the chance of that, then I can remove that from 100%, the other option, get the rest of it, and that's a chance it works. So if one set is not 7 or more, well, we just showed a moment ago that essentially it's 21 out of 36, so it's about 15 out of 36, or we can reduce that to 5 out of 12. So 5 out of 12 times a pair of dice won't get you to the 7. All right. Well, the general rule to think about is when you're trying to think of something the way it works, If you use the word or, you add up the probabilities. If you use the word and, you multiply them. What would it mean for my 3 sets to fail? It means the first 2 don't make a 7, and the back 2 won't make a 7, and the first and third won't make a 7, which means I need to multiply all those. So I'll take that 5 over 12 cubed. That's the chance that none of them make a 7. Well, none being a 7 is a failure. 1 minus that's a success. And you'll get 1,603 out of 1,728, about 93%. So that's actually how you do that calculation. You follow that idea for 4 dice, but on 4 dice, now you have 6 pairings, because it could be the first with any of the 3, the back with the 2 back, and the ones at the end. So you get 6 pairings. You can go through and show that, but you get to about 97%. And these are rounded numbers, so it might be about a 0.5% off one way or the other. But notice what happens. Adding in that extra die really doesn't do anything. You know, that's not saying that adding it in helps you with your crit value. If for some reason you're not looking at 7s, I don't know why you wouldn't, just for the hit, because we're thinking about more of the hit. We'll look at wounding for a second. But you're gaining very little. So if I can get to a +1, that's more than enough for me. I'm not worried about going to that. Notice also what that shows, importantly, is that if my opponent, say after current modifiers, is at a +1, but I have a blood I can spend, if I'm really worried about getting hit, I'm going to make them miss about 1/3 of the time if I spend that 1 blood. You don't have to worry about injuries if they don't hit you to start with, because you can take that 93 down to 58. They're losing over 30%. Like I said, they're losing like 35%. So, trying to position yourself or positioning poorly, doing something in a less advantageous way to get the extra dice doesn't really gain you a lot more chance on getting your success. As we're going to see, it might help more in terms of the wounding, and maybe that's more the concern that you have. But keep in mind that extra dice, if you're already at 97%, 1 more die, it's only going to gain you a point or 2. It's really not going to move that needle. If for some reason you have a really cool crit effect, I'm thinking sniper, priest, or just critical in general, then yeah, maybe you throw the extra ones in. Maybe you have ways to get those bonuses. But the sweet spot's about a +1. When you get to that, you're pretty good. All right, let's take a look at wounding then. Actually, one thing I should say. So no, it says diminishing returns. Spending more for it isn't necessarily getting that far. However, when we think of wounding, so 3 dice where you're wanting at least 2 or more to be a 9. So we're looking at base numbers. We could always adjust this as well. Obviously, be aware the outcomes get worse and worse if you go to higher ones. And if that's of interest, we can go through all that as well at a future time. Adding extra die now, you're gaining reasonable amounts. Instead of only gaining 3 to 4%, you're gaining 8% or more. So, and also the other thing to keep in mind is that when you're taking a look at actually this 9 or more, you're talking about taking someone out. The general rule to keep in mind, because the point of this is not keep these numbers memorized. The point is to notice that the more you need, adding more gets you more and more out of it. So when you want to go from 1 extra die on the 7, you're only getting a couple points. Whereas on the 9s, you're getting close to 10. If you need a 10 or 11 or any of that, now you're adding in significantly larger amounts. Again, doesn't mean that's going to be a good outcome that you'll get it, but you're getting more and more chances at that thing. So what this means is, one of the spots I sometimes see people, like I said, save for is they're saving for the bloodbath. The bloodbath is nice. However, if you think about it, depending on what they have, average dice on a bloodbath, so average dice a 3.5. So an average dice, that'll be enough to take someone out. But that's about 50% of the time. And if they have armor, that means say they have armor 1, that means your average on those 3 dice is only about 10.5, call it 9.5 or 10, if you want to round up. So bloodbathing, if they have like an armor 1, it's only about 50% of the time they actually take them out, if that's what you're doing on those dice. Yeah, if you get some good die rolls, it's going to go much higher, but that's about what you're looking at, because that's about the expected outcome of every die is about 3.5. Again, it's because of probabilities and large numbers. That's why it sits at 3, 4. Even when you consider it closer to the 4, okay, then maybe about 40% of the time the bloodbath won't do it. However, if they don't have armor, or even if it was an armor 1, being able to use just 1 point on it is going to up your chances of taking them out by so much more. If we compare it to, just a set of dice. Easy way to think about this, if you want a set of dice, think of what wouldn't succeed. Actually, no, you can count that. So, like I said, there's 6 7s, so there's 5 8s, so 4 9s, so 4, 3, 2, 1. So we're looking at what? That's 10 outcomes. So you're looking at 10 out of 36. That's about 28%. We had it on a previous slide, but as I sometimes remember people, I'm not a human calculator. So yeah, I do quickly check those numbers because I don't want to be wrong on those. So if we're looking at that, adding in an extra die, giving yourself that plus, you're going from, let's round it up, let's call it 30% for easy numbers. You're getting about half. You're getting 50% extra. Or 50% addition to it. So you're looking at now 80%. So honestly, a lot of the times, it's really good, unless you're just, even if you're hunting the 12s, that's a little bit tough. And again, a little more drastic if it's even sitting at the 10. If you end up needing that number, adding 1 more to your wounding, if they have that blood marker, that is going to help you so much. In essence, that's usually what I'm looking for. I'm not trying to get 6. If I can knock you down for and use 3 and bloodbath you, yeah, I will do that. But if I don't think I'm going to knock you down, if I'm having a hard time knocking you down, I'm just going to add that 1 extra die in. Or, as we'll see in a moment, I might put it on you so that way you don't hit me. So let's take a look at disadvantage. This is a much tougher calculation. I will walk you through one of them, but there's a reason why I didn't do nearly as much with this one. This one's actually a lot tougher to do. And again, the goal isn't to make you sit down and calculate. It's to give you an impression of what do the numbers look like. All right. So if you're disadvantage, what would it mean on 3 dice? So let's say you're at -1 die net disadvantage. Well, that means to succeed on a base of 7, you need all 3 combinations to be a 7. So if you think about it, there's essentially, you have these 3 dice. The difficulty with this calculation is that you have to think of what can work. So let's think of just 3 for a second. If one of those dice is a 1, then that means the other 2 dice must be 6s. All right, so we have that. Now we have to also think about the permutations of that. So if you think about it, let's say this is the 1. It could be this die, this one, or this one. So there's essentially 3 options of what it could be. If one of those dice is a 2, well, now you need the other dice to be 5s and 6s, or 6s. And you can think about all the different combinations of those could be. If a dice is a 3, well, now the other ones could be 4 and up, and all those combinations. What you're going to find is essentially 21 sets of combinations, and each one has a different amount of permutation. Permutation just means the order, arrangement of things with an order. That's all permutation really means. These things are that because you may not care the order, but which way you roll it will actually change in the 216 outcomes. If you actually put that together, it's about 70. I think actually it's 70. Originally when I counted, I think I was off by 1, but 70. It's about 32%. So normally, if I let them at 2 dice, they're about 60%, 58. But again, let's go with easy numbers. About 60%. This takes about 30%. So if I spend a blood marker on someone, I'm having overall the expected probability that they'll get. They're now, rather than likely to have it, and again, if you're a statistician, I know it's not exactly the term likely, but you're going from likely to have it to unlikely not to have it. One of the biggest things that my friend said it today as well, that I love spending on is a blood marker on when people want to dash. Especially if they want to dash so they can charge. They want to reposition themselves. Love spending it there. You're lowering their odds. They're half as likely to get what they were going to do, and that will stop their whole activation. Especially useful also if they're on those positive dice, because on the positive 3 dice, knock them down 1, appreciable change. This one's even more. If you spend enough to get them, say, down 2, this one's a much tougher calculation. I actually use Excel to help me out with this one, just to make sure I had it all right. I got about 193 out of 1296, about 15%. You're losing about half. If you add an extra one in, you're probably about another half. Not exactly, but you can think about it in terms of halvings. So from 2 dice to 3 to 4, needing those 7s, you're about losing half each time. You're going from 60 to 30 to 15 and so on. So do you save up the points to try and hit them for more in the injury? Or do I make sure nothing bad happens to me? This also tells you that, say, early in the game, you got pot shot at someone, you're long range, they're in cover, and you don't have any other bonuses. You're only succeeding, 15% of the time. Not very likely. If you happen to have a little bit of a bonus, hey, man, now you're about to 1/3. So you can use that to kind of get an idea. If it's, if I go here, I can shoot him, but they have a better shot back. If I go here, have a small chance at hitting that. Again, I'm just going to, think of the sniper because that's a very good long range gun. But they have a lot better pluses than I do. Well, if that's going to get me shot instead, they'll be at the advantage with high numbers. I'm at the disadvantage with very low numbers. Is that worth it? Again, we've all had the time where you're rolling 4 dice and you get 4 6s and it all worked out and you crit. But that's the cool one we remember. In reality, you're probably just going to miss. So something useful to keep in mind with that. Okay, listen, the goal of this wasn't to teach everyone all pure probability. So I did want to give an idea of what some of the numbers look like to give you an idea of scaling. We'll kind of put that together. So a few things to keep in mind. 1, no roll is atypical in this game. Here's what I mean by that. When you think of what your expected outcome is, expected outcome doesn't occur on individual rolls. It occurs on a large amount of rolls all put together. Think of flipping a coin. You flip a coin, say a quarter, and lands on heads. And then the next roll, heads again. That's not atypical. Each one was only 50% chance of each. They're individuals. Where you should expect to see about that 50-50, actually I'll tell you right now, if you're flipping a quarter, actually lands heads about 53% of the time, just because of the fact that it's not flat, the things that are on each side. But that only happens at, hundreds or thousands of rolls. That's really where you see that pull out. So, if you need, double 6s, it's not likely to happen. But if you happen to get it, it doesn't mean, everything worked out perfectly or your opponent had all that kind of stuff. Sometimes people get a little too invested in a particular roll. It can absolutely happen. So, if you need that thing in order to win, and this is the last Hail Mary, you go for it. But if you don't get it, or if you miss what seems likely, you just miss what seems likely. If you're rolling, what's nice at least about this game is after playing more 900 points, you are rolling more. You do have more models. You're getting more die rolls in. So it's getting closer to typical. But an individual roll going good or bad, I try not to put much stock in that. We've all been in cases, at least I have. I said, I'm on positive, I roll a bunch of 1s. I'm on 2 positive, I don't get any of them. All the best numbers are 3s. It happens. I'm not saying like you should expect it to happen. I mean this a little bit more in terms of don't harp on those good or bad results. If something goes crazy one way or the other, try not to focus on it. You should only be expecting 7s when you roll a lot. An individual roll being a 1 and a 2, it's just a 1 and a 2. Use your blood markers to save yourself. As you saw, you're about having each time that you use it the probability they had before. Using a single blood marker makes it go from about 60 to 30%. So that's actually huge, especially good if you're going at something that you really can't stand up against, or that also means if I'm wanting to do actions against you, if I have blood markers on me, it does make me consider you as a player. What might you spend it on? If I have disposable weapons, if I have one-shot type weapons, I don't really want to use those if I have blood markers, because why wouldn't you? I watched earlier today an RPG take out a mechanized infantry. There was no blood markers. Okay, maybe I need to try just to hit that guy, if only to put a marker on him, just so that way he's much more likely to fail that roll against me. Depending on his dice, of course, you could still be at pluses depending on the model. But also to make that person start wondering if they want to use it right then. If I know that you could put me in a negative for something that I'm not going to get to be able to do much of, do I do it? So maybe the crux of this is the idea of just don't save it all. Don't try to wait for that cool thing at the end, because to get to that cool thing, you might be doing a lot. Like I said, if you are looking at, you only can pump out one blood marker per thing, then you're looking at 6 things to happen before you can bloodbath something. Well, we showed getting that, say, 9, and 10 is more dramatic. Just getting that one extra die alone could be enough, and it greatly, greatly improves those odds. So shifting by 1 is huge. I play Arkham Horror, the card game. The general rule of thumb in there is, because of the way the bag is, that you want to be about +2. +2 means you're pretty good shot at getting it. In this game, it's about a +1. Getting more is better. Yeah, sure. But if I can get to about a +1, I feel pretty good about it. And if I can get you to about a -1, I feel pretty good about it. Shifting up by 1 is huge. For the negatives, if I get you about a -2, now I'm feeling very, very good about it. The other part is just roll with the rolls. You're going to roll good and bad. Just have fun with it. I said, don't try to math out every little number of exactly what's going to happen. But the hope is that maybe this gives people just a little bit of idea of what to aim for. And especially depending on how dicey or chancy you want to be with something, whether or not you want to do it. If what you're going to do has a low chance of success because of the negatives you're at, but, if it fails, something really bad can happen to you, you might not want to do it. If I only have a 15% chance of this working, I'm not going to put myself in a position where I'm going to get screwed if it fails. And I've watched that quite a bit. Especially I said, be careful. I watch a lot of people, I'll dash and then move because I want to use the dash, get close, these sort of things. Do you need to dash? Because if you don't, 40% chance you're just done. Your turn is over. I have a med kit. Okay, your med kit's probably the last thing that you do, because at 40% chance your turn is over. Those sort of things. When you're looking at models, obviously not all models are created equal, but any model that gets even a +1 to something that isn't necessarily always modified. Attacks are more modified, of course, but things that aren't always modified. A dash at a +1 becomes so much more likely. We look at some of the upgrades certain things can take. If you can actually take, say, a holy relic, if you're really worried about something happening, and you got the spare glory, or if you happen to have that sort of things in general, can really up you. So hopefully this was of interest to people. Hopefully you gain a little bit of knowledge from it. If you want more actual pure math breakdown, we can do that. If you want to know more of how to exactly calculate things, we can go through all of that. Like I said, this was much more of a primer, and to try to help maybe people who aren't quite as versed in it to realize what to look for, especially if you're just starting out in this game. I find some people are waiting to try to get the really cool thing. They're trying to get to that bloodbath. They're hunting for certain things. Those tokens are much better used for little things rather than the big stuff. The big stuff's what we remember. It doesn't happen quite as often. So hopefully this was of interest. If you do want more stuff like this, just say something in the comments. Let me know the sorts of things that you're looking for. Like I said, if you want something more mathy, that can be done. I can go through any level of it. We can discuss exactly how to do all this as well. But I said, I wouldn't sit at the table and do all this, but we could go through with that more. The hope is to be getting some battle reports out somewhat soon, now that we have some good tables that we like. My stuff is actually right in there. I'm going to try to finish painting it this week. Hopefully get some games in next week. Maybe actually start getting some of those recorded. Talk about those as well. Even though I can't record them fully, even just, taking some pictures and kind of walking through what happened and things seen and all of that. Also want to do some reviews of stuff for this as well. If you like other games, I do a lot of Conquest content. We've been doing some BattleTech stuff. We used to do a lot more of GW things. GW doesn't work with us well. They lock all the rules behind paywalls and stuff like that. It's just, it gets tougher to do their things. And I've been doing some of this other stuff more, although I'm still a big fan of 30K and some other stuff like that. So if there's any of these other things that you're interested in, follow along. We'll have plenty more of the stuff that we put out. If you have suggestions for things you'd like to see, you can always put them down below. Always taking a look. If you really like it, we have a Patreon as well. I don't usually push it much because on the Conquest stuff, we have a discount codes with them, so I push that more, but we do have that as well. It really helps keep the lights on. But I don't push that much until we have more content out for this game. Just don't have it yet. But, all right, on behalf of everyone at the show, then, has a good hopping. It's a great gaming.